Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Lauren and today I am going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the year of 2021. First of all, I'm sorry I have not posted in a while. I have been gone for I think 4 or 5 months, and this is kind of expected. I did just finish my fall sophomore semester of college. If you guys don't know, I'm a chemical engineering student, so I have zero time during the semester to devote to books, which is really sad because I do think reading is kind of my therapy at this point. But I really wanted to still come on and make a end of year wrap up. So yeah, today I'm going to be ranking and talking about all of the books that I read this year. I read about 15 books this year. I say about because some of them I DNF'd. Some of them I'm actually reading right now as the year is closing. I'm filming this on the 30th, so this is very critical, okay? I'm trying to finish these books before the year ends just so that my Goodreads challenge is complete, but I don't know if it's gonna happen, so we're kind of in a critical situation on that. I'm actually really kind of not that happy with how much I read this year, which I think is a really interesting feeling to have because I think reading is supposed to be very peaceful. You're not supposed to feel stressed about it or you have to reach a goal, but in my head, I just like to reach goals. So I actually had to limit down my book goal for this year. I ended up making my book goal 15, so I did complete it, but I originally started I think at 20 and I had to lower that number around October because I realized I just wasn't going to have time to read that many books, especially with some of the ones that are on my to be read list and some of the ones that I did finish. A lot of them took me a lot longer than I wanted to, and I had really sporadic reading schedules this year, so I think that's kind of what made me not read as much. And then also, now that I'm on break right now, I started break about 2 weeks ago and I was okay, I'm gonna read a ton of books, this is my time. And then I got home and I was I just want to relax and literally sleep and play Animal Crossing to relax my brain from the tremendous amount of stress I had this semester. So I think it's okay to sometimes realize that maybe reading isn't the most peaceful thing that you can be doing. So I think that's why I didn't read as much this year, but hopefully next year I can kind of work in reading into my semester. I think that's going to be one of my big goals for next year, is to try to read during the semester. So anyway, like I said, I read 15 books this year. I think last year I read 24, and last year I read a lot of series and fantasy and kind of YA books that I had missed before I started reading. And so this year I went into this year kind of trying to read more single books that aren't in series, and more literary fiction and books that are more talked about on the booktube space. Let's just get right into it. So the first book that I read this year was Salems by Stephen King, and I was so disappointed by this book. I don't know if I've talked about this on this channel before. I say that I'm a Stephen King fan, but I'm more of a Stephen King movie fan. I love movies like Pet Sematary or It, or Misery was a really good movie. There's a lot of Stephen King movies that I love, but I just haven't read that many of his books. I hated it. I don't know what it was. Plot didn't scare me, and it wasn't creepy at all either. I don't know if this is a spoiler. If you haven't read this book, maybe skip 20 seconds or something. This book is about vampires, and I didn't know that it was about vampires until page 400. And this whole time they're kind of in this really small, weird town, and disappearances are happening and weird things are happening. And I kind of thought in the back of my head that it was more of a demonic, something more scary in that way, but it was about vampires, and I didn't expect that to be the premise of this book. Just personally, I think vampires are very overly talked about in media. There's so many vampire TV shows, so many vampire books. I just feel vampires are not scary to me at all, and I think that's kind of why I hated this book, is because it wasn't creepy or scary. I think I ended up giving this 3 stars. If I were to go back, I probably would give it 2 stars, honestly, but I'm gonna be nice because it's Stephen King. But yeah, I was kind of disappointed by this one. It was kind of a long book to start my year with. Kind of started on a rough foot. So yeah, the second book that I read was a book that I was highly anticipating to read because I love this author. I read Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Honestly, was also kind of disappointed by this one too. I love Matt Haig because the first book that I read of his was How to Stop Time. I really like that book a lot, and I think it's really just a great book all around. It's very wholesome, it's very heartwarming, but it's also very philosophical and inspiring, and just so much about that book is amazing. This book, however, had some of the similar themes to that. However, I didn't necessarily like the character that much, or the characters that much, and I didn't feel a super strong connection to the main characters. It wasn't a bad book. It was really cool. I like the story concept. It's about this girl who goes through this kind of like, when you're stuck between life and death, there's this midnight library where you can pick books that are what your life would have been if you hadn't regret this or had done this instead. So it's very like reflective in that way, and you get to travel through this girl's life, but it's also kind of repetitive sometimes. Kind of didn't know where the book was going. The ending was pretty good, I would say, for what the plot was. But overall, I just didn't find it it didn't give me any like sparking revelations, so I thought it was very average. So yeah, I think I gave this one 3 stars as well. So the third book that I read was, you guys all know, Leave the World Behind. I did a video on this. It's actually my most viewed video on this channel, which is crazy to me because it's the worst video that I've ever produced. Like, I, first of all, looked terrible in that video. I was also like on a coffee binge and like had 2 cups of coffee already and just had so much weird energy that I just don't even know how to explain. So for anyone who has watched this video, I'm sorry. I'm not that person all the time. If you guys want more book rant videos, I would be happy to do them, but I also just don't really come across books that I hate that much that often. But I hated this book. If you guys want to hear more about why I hated this book, you can go watch that video. But basically, this book just gives you absolutely nothing. Like, go girl, give us nothing. There is nothing in this book that is worth your time. I think if you went into this book not knowing anything, you could really enjoy it and kind of find those deeper meanings that the author wanted to portray. But I didn't. I read the synopsis before I read it, and I was expecting something like completely different, and this book didn't give it to me. So that was just kind of something that I had to deal with, was just extreme disappointment. I think I gave it 1 star, so this was not good. Yeah, Leave the World Behind. Leave it behind. It's not worth it, okay? The next book that I read, I was actually very excited about. This was a very good book. I rated it 4 stars, and that was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I was so excited to read this because it's a thriller, dark book. I read a lot of dark thrillers, okay? And this was absolutely great. It's a very like investigative, southern small town, really fucked up book. It was written well. The characters were crazy. This book is so like, I feel like all of Gillian Flynn's books, she writes these characters that are just so unlikable, but it's so entertaining. Like, I love a good like dramatic character, and Gillian Flynn writes so many dramatic characters that it's so enjoyable to me. There are a lot of trigger warnings in this though, so if you are someone who has to worry about trigger warnings in books, there's a lot of stuff in here. I can't remember exactly because I did read this like over the summer and have forgotten a bit of the details, but I would recommend going and looking that up before you pick up the book if you are concerned about that, because there are some pretty dark themes in here. If you're looking for like a dark thriller, read Sharp Objects. It's very good. The next book that I read was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and this is also another dark thriller. I really liked this one too. Over the summer, I really hit like a peak of good books, honestly. It was so good. The setting of this book is very emphasized, and it really sets the tone for like the whole book, and I love that. I love the characters too. There were some really bad characters, but also really redeemable characters. I also love the plot of this book. There's a lot of mystery and weird things going on and investigating, creepy feel, but creepy in a different way because it is set in this like Mexican town, and it's just very different. So I really did like this. Also, the cover is beautiful, and yeah, I think I gave it 4 stars. Usually I just give 5 stars to books that are really profound in some way, so that's why I didn't get 5, is because it's just like a thriller book. But I really liked it, and I would highly recommend it if you're looking for a thriller. I then kind of went on this binge where I really wanted to read books that I had just been hearing so much about and wanted to know what the hype was. So I read a fair amount of Sally Rooney, a fair amount of books that have been talked about very heavily in the past couple of months and this year as a whole, so we'll get into those right now. The first book of these that I read was Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. This was my favorite one out of the 2 that I've read, so compared to Normal People, I like this one the most. It's a literary fiction about these 2 girls who have a weird relationship with this couple. I really liked it just because it had a lot of drama, and the characters, although people don't really like the characters, I've heard, I really liked them. I also thought the plot was very interesting with this like relationship with this other couple and all this stuff, and I think I gave it 4 stars. So yeah, I also read Normal People, of course, and this was very interesting. I didn't like this one as much as Conversations with Friends, but it was more profound maybe. It had a little bit more substance to it though somehow. Like, I felt more emotional reading this one, but I'm not sure if I like it more. If I had to rate them, I would recommend Conversations first, just because it's more lighthearted. Well, not lighthearted, but it's more like easy to get into, whereas this one I feel like is more specifically relatable to a specific group of people and not so much everyone. It's basically following these two people in this relationship that's kind of toxic, which I feel like all of us can relate to a toxic relationship, but personally I just didn't care that much about their relationship, and the whole book is their relationship, so I think that's kind of where I fell flat on this book, but I did give it 4 stars anyway because I think it is very profound for a certain group of people, and I just probably am not that audience. While we're on the super trendy train, I also read We Were Liars by E. Lockhart because I was so curious about what the hype was, and honestly I was kind of disappointed. Like, I did not like this book as much as people say they do. I don't know what it is. I think because it's a thriller, and I've read so many thrillers that are so much more well crafted and more thrilling, I think that's kind of my main problem with this. Like, this is a very good thriller if you've never read a thriller before. I think that's my kind of comment on it, is that I think it was very, I mean, the surprise at the end is surprising. It wasn't all it cracked up to be for me. I think it's mainly, like I said, because I have read other thrillers before, that this one just kind of seemed very basic in the setup and the punchline at the end and everything. It wasn't the vibe for me, so I gave it 3 stars. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it as much as other people did. Okay, next, this book that I read, I loved this book. This was my first 5 stars out of the year, and I would highly recommend this book to anyone, like literally anyone. I think someone who has like never read a book before and hates reading would love this book. I would recommend this to someone who only reads literary fiction. I would recommend this to someone who like really likes mysteries and thrillers. This is so good, and I think I saw that they're making a movie for this book, so I'm so excited. Like, I can't wait to watch it. But I gave this book 5 stars, and that is Anxious People by Frederick Backman. I wish I could read more books like this that just like make me so excited and make me so happy and sad at the same time. Like, I loved all of the characters in this book. I loved all of the plot line and sort of philosophical aspects that come with it, and the relationships and connections and the message. Like, oh my god, I loved this book. This book is about these 6 people who are in this hostage situation, but it's not really a hostage situation. I mean, it is, but like it turns into more than that. I love the way that he wrote this because it is about the hostage situation, but it's also about the people in the situation and their lives and who they are and why they're there. It's so crazy, and I loved this. Like, 10 out of 10. Go get it, go read it, it's good. Another book that I read this summer that also got 5 stars was Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. The characters I loved, the plot I loved, the writing I loved, the message I loved. There was just everything about this book was amazing, and you just get so attached to the main character. It was also a really good like summer read. Gave it a 5 stars. Now, the next book that I read was sadly a DNF. I really don't DNF books that often, but I think the reason I DNF'd this book was honestly because of the size of it. It just felt impossible, and it felt so not worth the time that I was about to spend reading it, and that was The Deep by Alma Katsu. I actually picked this book up on accident. That was my first problem. I was actually looking for The Deep by Rivers Solomon, and it's this really great book that I've heard about, kind of more of a historical fiction on Black slaves turning into mermaids, being thrown overboard, but I accidentally bought this book instead, The Deep by a different author. Second, when I started reading it, it's also a historical fiction, but it's focusing on the Titanic and this girl who worked on the Titanic, but she's kind of crazy, but then also all of the people on the ship think that it's haunted, and there's this like weird mysterious force coming from the ocean, you know, hinting at sirens and stuff like that. And it's very interesting, I would say, but it was very obvious the whole time. And for the size of this book, like, it just felt so repetitive. It's listed as a slow burn on Goodreads, which was my other problem with it. I was like, oh my god, I cannot sit through a slow burn book about the Titanic and sirens. Like, nothing of substance was happening. It was very slow burning, and it was also not really action packed at all. Like, when the plot twist would come after all that time, they wouldn't even be surprising. Like, it was not worth the time that I had spent reading this book. I think I got like halfway, and then I literally flipped to like the last couple of pages just to see if I would miss anything if I didn't read this, and it was the exact same as what I've been reading the whole time. So it was just very repetitive and very not super interesting with what was happening. So the next book that I read was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I also did a book talk about this, and it was really good. I would also recommend this. Gillian Flynn has yet to disappoint me, honestly. I haven't read the rest of her books yet, but I want to, so that'll be something that I'll be doing the next year. But I also watched the movie, which was also really good. I think they did a really good book to movie adaptation, and I really liked the plot. I loved going into this not knowing anything, because that's exactly what I did. 10 out of 10 experience. It was amazing. I would recommend this going into it blind if you haven't, because it was that good. The plot twists and stuff like that and the characters, you really want to know as little as possible when you start this. I think there are also some trigger warnings in this book too, so check those out if you need to. But yeah, other than that, I really liked this. It was very thick, honestly, but it was worth every page, I would say. So yeah. The next book, oh, this is another DNF. Oh my god, I forgot that I DNF'd this. I read The Wig, The Bitch, and the Meltdown by J. Manuel. If you don't know what this book is, J. Manuel was one of the creative directors for America's Next Top Model, and he wrote this book, and I was really excited to read this book because I was like, I love J. Manuel, I love America's Next Top Model. This title is like insane and the cover is really pretty, and I was like, okay, what is this about? Like, I have to at least know somewhat. And basically it's a kind of satirical book of fiction about these characters who are trying to come up with their own model TV show, which is basically just an exact knockoff of America's Next Top Model, but in this book. And it is kind of very interesting in the way that it portrays characters and the like showing the production process, and it really does give you an insight into the reality of the model world. However, I just already knew all of that. Maybe it's because I just watched too much America's Next Top Model and too much like fashion videos and all of that kind of industry. I just really didn't gain anything from this book, but it is very basic and simple in the way that it talks about those topics. It brings light to those topics, but for me, I found it very repetitive, bad writing, cringy. It was so cringy, and I had to DNF it because it was just too much. So if you do kind of want to see more about the fashion world or modeling, or production and that kind of world and how toxic it is and, you know, what goes on behind the scenes, I think this is a good book for that. But honestly, it just didn't give me a lot other than that, so that's why I DNF'd it. Then I went to school and I didn't read anything for like 4 months, which is so sad. But when I got back, the first book that I picked up was Dumb Witness by Agatha Christie. I have never read an Agatha Christie book, so I really felt like I needed to, and this is the one that I started with just because this was the one that I had. If you guys watched my book haul that I did, I went to this thrift store in New York and they had 2 Agatha Christie books for like $2.99, and I was like, oh my god, so I picked both of them up. The other one that I have is Five Little Pigs, I think is what it's called, but I wanted to read this one first just because the dog on the front of it is so cute. I gave it 3 stars. I think it was pretty good, honestly, for an Agatha Christie novel. I liked it. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was literally just a mystery. And I think I haven't read mystery like at all now that I'm thinking about it. I've read very like investigative thrillers and stuff like that, but I haven't just read like a straight up mystery. So this was very interesting to kind of see the working through the case and what happened and what led up to the murder and stuff like that. And yeah, it was very interesting. The one thing that I will say about this is that I think I might not like mysteries, or I might not enjoy them as much as other books, because maybe it's from my like engineering background or like being in STEM and constantly having to problem solve in my day-to-day life. I just like, for some reason, when I read a mystery novel, I am constantly thinking about like what is connecting, what clues we're missing, what's gonna connect, like who did this, where and what, and who did it. Like, I'm just constantly thinking about the different possibilities, and it's very hard to enjoy the book when you're constantly thinking about the tiniest little details in it. So I'm not sure if I like mysteries that much, honestly. I liked this book though. It was entertaining, and I love Agatha Christie's writing style and kind of the banter between the 2 detectives, but honestly it's just a little stressful for me to read mysteries, so I don't know if I liked it as much as I could have. I didn't guess who did it. I was so close though. It was really good though. I would recommend. And then currently I have not finished these books, but these are the 2 books that I'm trying to finish before the end of the year because I am crazy. I started reading The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I am really trying to get more into classics, and this is a very short classic that I've heard is written very well and accessible almost. So I'm about like halfway through. It's going pretty well. I'm losing interest a little bit, so I'm hoping that things pick up in some sort of way soon, because I don't want to hate this. I really want to like it. I've heard that it's really good. And then the other book that I just started yesterday was Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You? I really want to read this book almost more than The Bell Jar, because this is Sally Rooney's 3rd book. She just came out with it this year. It's really pretty, and I read the first like 2 chapters and it's very interesting. I'm very into it. It's a little bit long though, honestly. It's like 370 pages, I think. I'm really excited to see what Miss Sally Rooney has to offer in her third book. I've heard really good things from other people who have already read it. So yeah, those are all the books that I read this year and that I'm trying to finish before the year ends. Leave in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you think of them, if you enjoyed them, if you hated them, what are some books that you guys read this year that you really liked or disliked, and what are you planning on doing for the new year in terms of reading goals. But yeah, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more content from me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Have a great new year, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.